And ladies and gentlemen, it really is a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank you all for taking some time out this Friday afternoon. I'd also especially like to recognize Ambassador Murata for coming out this afternoon. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I should also acknowledge a few other folks, but I'll get to that later. And I'd, of course, like to thank the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan for hosting this event. It really is a great privilege to spend a few minutes this afternoon with you to discuss some of the recent scientific findings related to the Fukushima radiological disaster. And to be honest, as a simple scientist, it's not very often that we come and give a formal press conference related to these kinds of findings. And so, but there's been some developments in the last year or two, really, especially in recent months, that really, I think, bring some sense of urgency to sharing some of these latest findings. And so today, hopefully, I'll have a chance to share a few key results from our recent work, not just our work, but mostly our work. And hopefully this will be of some relevance, I think, to certainly the people of Japan, as well as people that might be visiting Japan in the coming years. So my concerns of the past few months really have stemmed from the fact that there's a growing number of scientific studies concerning radiation effects on plants and animals from Chernobyl, but also from Fukushima, and that these have clearly demonstrated impacts, injuries to individuals, populations, communities, and even whole ecosystems. These findings, I think, have significant implications for the recovery of contaminated regions of Japan, and I'll discuss some of these recent findings in a few minutes in some detail. A second reason for my concern stems from the fact that it's apparent that some governmental and intergovernmental organizations are ignoring these scientific studies, and you can't help but think that this must be a deliberate attempt to minimize some of these consequences for the environment related to nuclear accidents. I think, let me just go into a couple of the recent reports. When we first got going into the work in Chernobyl, this report was released by the International Atomic Energy Agency's Chernobyl Forum, and this kind of motivated a lot of our recent work. They suggested that populations of many plants and animals have expanded, and that the present environmental conditions have had a positive impact on the biota of the Chernobyl exclusion zone. We had been to Chernobyl a few times prior to this report and could see no evidence that this was the case, and so this really motivated much of our recent work as a test of this. More recently, more relevance for today's presentation, is the recent UNSCAR report to the UN General Assembly, where they suggested, with a complete absence of any sort of supporting documentation, that exposures of both marine and terrestrial non-human biota following the Fukushima accident were, in general, too low for acute effects to be observed. And then they kind of contradict themselves in the second part of this statement, suggesting that any radiation effects would be restricted to a limited area where the deposition of radioactive material was greatest. Beyond that area, the potential for effects on biota is insignificant. And this particularly troubled us, given that there had been perhaps a half a dozen publications related to Fukushima that had been released prior to the release of this report, and many more related to Chernobyl effects, which are quite similar in terms of the radiation and consequences. So again, this is the primary motivation for speaking out